Hey, peace right back to you. And thanks very much, for sending that along because I do feel that both of us are, have kind of as our objective, to be informing, in terms of whatever we're trying to do. And I'm hoping that the only result of this will be, better information out there altogether. Okay. Um, uh, you know, one of your main things in the beginning was that, because the learned doctor has a posting on one of his blogs that called, says that um, lending is not reserve constrained. Okay, it's not reserve constrained. Okay, um, and and again, that ties in, somewhat with Steve Keen's thing about the fact that, well, they're not really reserve constrained because they don't first have to have the deposit before they can make the loan. Okay, they make the loan first and then they get the deposit. Both of those things kind of combine of a substance, the result of which is that substance overcomes all of the limitations that's put on a banking system if you were to resort to full reserve banking. Okay. Now, that's what I want to differentiate. Okay. Full reserve banking is on one side of the ledger, and then every fraction of reserve banking, right down to zero, is on the other side of the ledger. Okay. I got to presume that you've read the Kucinich bill because I know that you seem to do a lot of reading, and I asked you to point out how, under the Kucinich bill, under what provision of the Kucinich bill, banks could still create money. Okay, so that's still out there. Okay, and then what I have to tell you is they cannot. Okay, they cannot, because Bill Mitchell's and Warren Mosler's descriptions of today's system of fractional reserve banking, and Steve Keen's, in which banks are not reserve constrained from making loans, only applies in the system. Only applies in this system. It applies because that's the set of rules and regulations that we have. When you read Modern Money Mechanics, the Fed's publication, and you see in there that you can read right in there that it says that the requirement for reserves can be met by either getting a loan from another bank or by getting a loan from the Fed itself that the Fed can create out of nothing. Okay, all of that stuff only serves to meet the reserve requirement. The reserve requirement doesn't go away, and that's the thing about Steve Keen's thing. Okay, the reserve requirement doesn't go away. If there was a truing up every night of the reserve requirement, you have to have your reserve requirement every night, which you don't. Okay, because they created all kinds of sweep accounts. They created all kinds of things to keep from having to actually meet the reserve requirement. Okay, and then they only really have to do it, I think it's on a quarterly basis, to show it. So yeah, there is zero. There is zero constraint against the banks first making the loans and then getting. But that has nothing to do with full reserve banking. Nothing. Zero. I hope that you've read the Program for Monetary Reform, the 1939 Program for Monetary Reform by Fisher and Douglas and the senator from Illinois. In which they lay out the rationale for having the government issue the money. Okay, and to operate on a full reserve basis. So, see, the funny thing is that actually in the course of your video, I heard you say you don't really have anything against the government issuing money, per se. You don't really have anything against full reserve banking, per se. Unless you say it's going to get in the way of actually having the bank's ability to create credit. Okay. Well, really, then I'm not really sure what objection that you have to the Kucinich bill or to the type of money system that that we advocate, because I always keep saying when people talk about MMT and how close is it to us, and because there are many commonalities, it's not a common thing, but there are many commonalities to it, just as there are many commonalities to Austrian economics. Okay, The people need to understand it. That people need to understand it. So this is what I want to say about it. Full reserve banking requires that a bank, in order to lend, have the money in its account. Period. Where it gets that money doesn't matter. If it wants to, you mentioned something about interbank lending creates money. No, under a full reserve banking system, interbank lending does not create money. No, that interbank, you deposit your money in your bank for 1 year and you give it to that bank, okay, and they give you something for it, and they can lend it. They can lend it to anybody who comes in the door, and if nobody comes in the door, they can lend it to the other bank because somebody came in their door. But none of them are creating money. That process creates no money. The money has to come from somewhere, okay? And that's the difference between us and the Austrians. Now, the Austrians say, well, we're only going to increase it by the gold. Now, I admit that gold is a confounding thing here, and a lot of this stuff is a throwback to the gold system, okay, that we could throw away. Say there isn't have to be any reserves. We're just going to have money, and banks are only going to be able to lend real money. You know, that perfect the contract between the depositor and the lender. You know, so reserves as a concept could go out the window. But until it does, you know, you say that it has to be fully reserved, it has to be fully backed by something that makes loans. You really have a problem between, I'm sorry, but you really have a problem between differentiating between money and credit. Okay, and money and credit. And when I say credit, I mean debt, of course, debit, of course, because why? They're the opposite side of the balance sheet. Under our system, the government will create the money. Now, period. Okay, the government will create the money. You know, if you take a look back at the, I don't want to say the last 5 years because there's been kind of the last 5 years of tumult in any kind of national economy. But let's just say you take a look at the next 5 years, you know, and over the next 5 years, a rationally growing economy that fixed all the problems that we have now grew by 3% a year. 3% a year on average, okay? And you grew the money supply by 3% a year on average, okay? How much restriction would that, first of all, would that place on the lending by the banks? The answer is zero. It would place zero restriction on it, okay? And why? Because that's the amount that the economy grew. If the economy grew by 3% and the money supply grew by 3%, that by definition is not inflationary, and it's not deflationary because it enables growth to the potential, to its potential. So there's no restriction on credit whatsoever under the Kucinich bill and under the debt-free money system that we advocate. Okay, debt-free money, not debt-free credit. Let me know if you get that, because if you get that, I think, you know, there's a possibility of making progress. Okay, that is to say that every time a borrower comes into the banker's door, okay, to grow the economy, that money has been created. Now, the money doesn't go to you know, by the government to where all the government does is determine the amount of money that is created. That's all. Okay? Then that money is equally distributed throughout the country on a per capita basis. What do I mean when I say that? What I mean when I say that is that first 25% of that money goes directly to the states for state projects, and the other 75% are things that are in the government's budget. Okay. Now, does that mean that every person in every state gets an allocation of money? No. Okay. What it means is that the state of Virginia, you know, because of its number of Social Security recipients, or because of its number of, you know, whatever types of facilities, government facilities that there are, or private contracting facilities that contract with the government for whatever, okay, that they get paid in created money, you know, to meet that purpose. So the same amount of money is going to be created. There's going to be adequate money to make all loans, by definition. So then we come to the big difference. And, you know, I'm a progressive, you know. I admit to being a progressive labor, person. And by that I mean that, you know, I believe Saudis, Daly's principle that it is labor that creates wealth, and labor must be rewarded for the creation of wealth. Okay, now, to me, that can't happen if the first thing that happens when you create money is to give it to the rich Wall Street bankers. Because if you don't know by now that the first thing they're going to do with the money is make more money, you know, and you say it's because of speculation. Well, yeah, we're not going to stop. We're not going to end speculation. We'll let there be speculation, but they're only going to speculate with your money and my money and real money. They're not going to leverage speculation. They're not going to create financial products, that financial assets that they're going to use to leverage that speculation. There's going to be none of that. And that's the thing that Steve Keen don't get for some reason, even though we made a video about it. Because Steve Keen is big on ending leverage speculation. So, the issue is that we're talking about having the government create the money. Now the money's in existence. After that, the banks do whatever they want with it. Well, I should say the banks do whatever their depositors want with it, because if you don't like what the bank's doing with your deposit of your money that you gave to them to use, for which they're giving you a return, then you're going to take that money and you're going to put it in another bank whose lending policies go more along with what you believe. And that's why we're going to have more of those credit unions, by the way. That's why we're going to have more cooperative banks, by the way, because actually the people are going to be in control of their money. But this is this is not, a little thing that, that the MMT people get by to dismiss because it sounds like Austrian economics, or that's a throwback to another era, or any of that stuff. This is the future that we're talking about here, and I really hope that you can figure it out. That this is nothing that is dismissed at all by any of either the Chartists or the Austrians, because they both seem to think they're the smartest kids in the room. So do we. Thanks a lot for listening yourself.